Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to come here to share this very nice discussion with you. It's quite a privilege to speak after Inger, but then I'm going to introduce a disclaimer. I feel myself not like being a keynote introductory speaker, but I'm going to be a kind of commentator of Inger's ideas, because I think that much of what I was going to say is somehow reflected, and I think that there are some ideas that could help into the policy discussion to come. Just to start with a vision, an idea, some pictures. Imagine anyone comes to ask you, how could you take a picture of a resilient city? And imagine that, or a non-resilient city, and to what you have to be resilient. And then trying to figure out what type of image I could bear in mind, I was thinking of Bloomberg after Sunday's hurricane in New York, and making such a strong political statement, saying that this could not happen anymore, and putting in place a kind of big plan to get New York prepared for any other extreme event in the years to come. I was thinking of heat waves in areas of the Mediterranean. I was thinking of Barcelona without drinking water for a while after a very extreme drought period in 28, sorry. I was thinking of many Central European cities under the water because of the floods. And I was thinking to what extent these cities could be ready and resilient in case any of these events could happen again. And all the cities I was mentioning are supposed to be already resilient and privileged cities. So it's not the type of dramatic pictures we can have in mind when thinking about these slums, these third world, big speedy growing cities, where the type of impacts could be much more like the type of pictures we've got from IT 2 weeks ago. So it's quite a great challenge to think to what extent our cities are resilient to what it is going to happen or what it may happen. But that's connecting SDG 11 with SDG 13 when having this type of image and visions in our minds. But then it's true that coming back to Inger's report, if we come back to SDG 11, we realize that we've got air quality and health, we've got poverty eradication and inequalities growing among our cities too, among our citizens in our cities. We've got access to energy, access to water, the discussion on the use of soil and to what extent this could mean also an increase in equality. And we realize that there are many other interconnections. I like it the way Inge introduced this transformative action field that do connect jointly or separately to some of the SDGs that are not under the SDG 11, but that means that SDG 11 is not just SDG on its own, but also a reference to a key player to achieve all the other SDGs. And to what extent, when talking about access to energy and climate, mobility and transportation, form of the city, use of the land, or health, we are not talking about poverty, inequalities, or increasing risk of getting into a higher degree of poverty for some of our citizens. So the social aspects that are now was introducing when starting this session. I could say that probably there are three main simple conclusions to be drawn from this. One of them is that Inge was commenting on that too. SDGs have been adopted by national governments, prime ministers, heads of state, but they are going to be implemented mainly in urban context. So that is quite a challenge, and that's quite a key condition for success for the years to come. And it could be interesting to know to what extent we are ready to get into a proper response coming from urban areas, urban leaders, and citizens. The second thing is that it brings us into something that has been coming up during the last decades, years, and it has exploded as a fact in Habitat 3, in the conference held this week in Quito, which is that urban aspects, local aspects, to also imply global aspects. So this traditional, very famous slogan, act locally, think globally, should be corrected, updated. So to say that if you want to think locally, you also have to act globally. So this is not anymore a question of a division between acting concrete, because, but bear in mind the global aspect is that whatever you do locally has a very serious global implication, first thing. Second thing, if you want to be responsive, serious in terms of your own action at the local level, you have to bear in mind that that would have an impact in the global world, and the other way around. If you want to achieve, if you want to reach some solutions to the global issues, you will have to think and act locally. And the third main conclusion is that it is not clear to what extent this new, favorite guest in the global arena, so the local players, are sufficiently conscious and count on the needed structures so to develop the proper answers that could be demanded by the citizens, by any stakeholder, by however we want to call them, the representatives of the global goods in the world. So the main question would be to what extent we have developed strategies of preparedness for what it is going to be the main challenges around these issues in the years to come. And I could point out some of the questions that could be important in terms of this discussion around preparedness. One of them is the institutional coherence aspect. I think that for a very long time there has been such a strong claim around decentralization, so empower the local figures so to take decisions, which is great. But the question is that this is not enough. I mean, thinking that a mayor is going to solve all these issues alone is just nonsense. We need to ensure consistency among the different levels of decision. So the type of red arrows that Inger was pointing out in her presentation, it's not just that the national governments do deal at the international arena, and then there are very decentralized systems that empower the local communities to do things, because that is not going to be the case. Not everything can be covered at the local level independently on what it is happening around, and very frequently things do not match in a coherent manner. So to what extent we can ensure that there are all these other red arrows that are needed. So a capacity to discuss on the global impact, a capacity to learn together, and a capacity to develop coherent response, policy responses at the different levels of the national and regional levels in order to ensure that the action at the local level does have an impact. The second thing is probably something that in our type of cities has got some experience, or in every type of city, but probably we have developed, according to, type of cities. I was trying to come back to your class, to your classification cities, no? But I was thinking in European terms, which is the possibility to develop all type of partnerships and alliance with different interested stakeholders around different issues at the local level. That we've got very interesting experiences. That also helps into the appropriation of the agenda, the capacity to identify the priorities, and the capacity to ensure that these social and inclusiveness aspects do impact in terms of the real policy and measure responses at the local level. The third thing I could point out in terms of discussing to what extent we are prepared is to what extent we count on a concrete definition of goals. Still coming back to this approach of the transformative action fields, the transformational pathways, if we want to call them that way, drive us into what? Do we have a clear picture on where we want to be in 30 years' time, in 20 years' time? Do we have public commitments, engagements on how we are going to identify and prioritize all these transformations so that we can have a broad idea on what this could imply at the global level and also at the local level? What are the type of difficulties that we could be facing and how we can overcome these difficulties? I guess that here we've got many different realities. There are cities that are much more proactive in terms of identification of their own vision into the future. This is a very important part of this preparation because, in fact, that implies that we are conscious of what type of social contract, what type of social cohesion, what type of future we want to draw together. I'm afraid that we still lack some systemic approach on how we combine all the different demands at the local level around the whole list of the SDGs and the pre-existing understanding on what a city should be providing. Then we come into the tools, some other discussion, getting into the needs and the economic ways to cover those needs. And again, sometimes there are institutional barriers that that make difficult the access to funding to get into what it has been drawn as the main picture, the main goals for the cities to deliver. But very often there is also strong pressure around the trade-off between efficiency and equity. So to respond in terms of investing in the public services, ensuring that it can go on its own and it can be paid back in the long run. But that could have an impact in terms of the social cohesion, and at the end it is not so clear to what extent we are measuring properly what we are demanding when getting into the broader discussion of the decisions to be financially covered. Still, probably, in terms of the form of the city, and there we've got some very interesting examples coming, for instance, from Santiago de Chile or other big cities in Latin America that do look much more the American, the Chicago way, than the Stockholm, Barcelona way, we realize to what extent, in the long run, it's not just a question of environmental footprint and the waste of environmental resources, including soil, but many other aspects, but also a very important social impact in terms of health, because of air quality, in terms of personal, how to say that, time being invested in the going forwards and going backwards from home to the hospital, to the school, and so on. And it tends to impact much more dramatically into those citizens with less resources, with less incomes, than on the citizens with higher income. So at the end, it increases the inequalities among the citizens. There could be a need for more cars because there are not good public services in terms of transformation, because the size of the city, because of the allocation of the different services and uses of the city in the different neighborhoods. And it could be much more difficult to get this being undone. But if to cover all those needs through public services, the big question is to what extent we count on the right taxation systems and fiscal systems in a context where we are still wondering what are the type of fiscal systems that we need to develop in this century. And then, in terms of preparedness, I was trying to figure out to what extent there have been previous exercises that could be helpful, and what type of systemic approach, including a participatory procedure, could be useful for the time to come. And in fact, the answer should be reasonably clear. The cities have got a great experience when building the Agendas 21. And of course, not everything that came up when building those agendas could be fully implemented because of various reasons, including this institutional lack of coherence when dealing with the different policies, or these difficulties in terms of assessing a nice fiscal and financial response. But it could be a very inspirational manner to identify to what extent cities could build their own Agenda 2030, because they have got these memories on how to get this systemic approach of all those things. And then my very last comment, coming to the global context, I think that we should comment a little bit on the new urban agenda and the Habitat 3 conference being held this week. Why? Because I think that it has got the great add value to be able to overcome the building household approach into something that is much more global in terms of local context, so urbanization, but also in terms of the global aspect, why there are this relationship and why there is this global interest in how cities react and behave. At the same time, there is a kind of frustration around the whole process and the final declaration, because Habitat 3 is, or the Habitat Conference, is once every 20 years. So we will have to wait till 2036 in order to have the next big conference on what is the role of the cities in the global context, in the context of the global challenges. And I guess that many of us would have expected more in terms of to what extent this could become that platform where this understanding of the global issues and the role of cities in the global context could be ensured. So to have some further understanding on the type of tools we can develop, to have some further understanding on what type of engagements and adaptation, appropriation of the agendas being adopted at the UN level in 2015, so the SDGs and the Paris Agreement could be, or even how to fund development otherwise, could be addressed, so a kind of declination of these agendas at the local level. We don't see much of that. And even some further understanding on what type of concrete elements to facilitate what you can anticipate, you will not be able to anticipate. I mean, when seeing these pictures of slums, these rates of growth in terms of occupation of the soil, of the land in many of these big mega cities for the years to come, we can fully understand that it could be very, very difficult to say, yes, you just have to make a proper urbanization process. Hey guys, this doesn't happen that way. And this is not going to happen this way. I mean, I cannot think of any of these national governments or local governments being able to anticipate a proper urbanization process to host so many people in places where you've got so many problems that you cannot think smartly in that way. So I guess that some kind of toolkits that could allow the midway in terms of informal, some formal first reactions to at least make easier the process of formalization of what it is going to happen later on when the informal settlements have been set in place, could also have been a good result of Habitat. So to end, yes, pretty interesting steps forward in these last decades, much more conscious on the critical role to play by cities in the accomplishment of the whole list of the SDGs. But yes, yet much to be done along these big transformational pathways that need to be understood and anticipated in a smart manner.
Okay. So Teresa, thank you very much for your reflections, which link